All right, guys, here we are. Going to talk about two kayaks, and they're two different kayaks actually. One is the Feelfree lure. This is the 11.5 foot V2, which I had this one first, and I love it. There's nothing wrong with it. And then I got this one, the Crescent LiteTackle, and I fell in love with this one for one reason. This is a faster kayak than what this kayak is. And I want to kind of talk about stability. Stability is one of the things that when you gain stability, you're also going to lose a little bit of your speed. And that's where a kayak like this one in the LiteTackle is going to shine. And you get into the newer version of LiteTackle 2, it's the same hull on this, so it's going to wind up propelling through the water just with the same amount of effort and inertia, whatever you want to say, through the water on a glide as this one will. You're not going to get the same thing out of this one. Now they're both wide. You can get into more narrow ones like a tarpon or something like that, and they glide pretty quick on the water. But for something like this, they're both rated at 34 inches wide. Now I've measured this kayak, and this one's 34 inches. This one here, I've measured it, and I get 35, but manufacturer says 34. But I get 35 out of it. Anyways, you'll sometimes find manufacturers like to kind of tweak numbers a little bit, and they also say that this kayak here on the lure weighs at 87 pounds minus the chair. This one here, they don't say anything about minus chair at all, but they say it's at 75 pounds. I would probably agree with that. It feels like about 75 pounds, and if I took the chair out of here, I believe I've heard references right around 69 pounds or so for this kayak here. And that's pretty good. So if you're trying to dolly this thing out for a long distance, having it lightweight is really key. If you're just gonna load and go, it's not so much of a problem unless you've got issues and stuff. And that's where having something like this, maybe you don't want something like that, because I think that this one right here, 87 pounds minus the seat, plus the seat added to it, I've heard reports somewhere right around 97 pounds, 96 pounds. And then I wind up adding that more when I put the depth finder in there. So if you have anything else hooked onto it, it adds weight again. Now that doesn't also include the rudder that's installed on this one. And that's one of the things that makes this kayak really well. It's a functioning kayak that has a lot of maneuverability. By adding that rudder, this kayak actually runs through the water effortlessly with that rudder on there. Without it, you get a little bit of dog leg out of it, and that has a lot to do with the transition of this hull, and you don't get so much of that with this kayak, because when I get ready to flip this over, I'm going to talk about both kayaks here, and you'll see why this kayak actually does kind of run through the water pretty well, and actually tracks pretty well. So it's got good ratings and reviews on a kayak like this. Now, one of the things I want to talk about is stability, and with stability, you have to have a wider kayak. With this kayak right here, because of the geometry of the hull in this one, on the water side, you have a really beneficial amount of stability in this one. And let me demonstrate, just by standing on the ground. You don't see me moving the kayak too much. So take that into record a little bit, what I'm doing here. Then I get into the Crescent, and you see that I get a little more rocker in it. I'm just standing on flat ground, and because of that, that is the key feature why one kayak will run slower and one will run faster. And also stability with less stability. Now, a kayak like this has great primary stability, which is in the center of it, and fantastic secondary stability, which is on the outside of it. And that's all because of the shape of the hull. This one here has great primary in the middle of it, but you lose a little bit of the secondary. But when you start to tip a little bit, you'll all of a sudden feel yourself catch, and it doesn't want to go anymore. So you find yourself having a little bit more maneuverability in something like this, where you can lean, turn in corners, cut through rapids more, and I think it also breaks the wake a little bit better. And that's one of the reasons why I prefer the Crescent myself. I do love the lure. I have nothing to say that's really bad about it. If you're a lake fisher, I think this is a fantastic kayak right here. If I was only doing lakes and I had to go one way or the other, that'd be a hard choice, because this one does run faster in the water. This one runs a little bit slower. Now, if time is the essence, well, then this is the way to go. If it's not, then this is definitely the way to go, because I do feel really safe in this. I can stand in this one. I can fly fish in this one. Whatever you want to do. This has a lot more stability versus something like this. And I keep saying stability, but that's what this is about. And it's all about the geometry of these kayaks. So let's get these things flipped over and take a closer look at what's kind of going on the backside. All right, so now that we got these kayaks flipped over, it kind of gives you an idea of kind of what's going on here. You'll notice on the the belly of this Feelfree, how it's a bit more transitioned and rounded, but you do have these in cuts on there, and those are primarily designed in there for tracking, and it does help. And something like this one right here has a little bit more of a wider keel than what this has, but if you notice, it's a bit pronounced. And with this one right here, the secondary right here is actually higher in this direction. So the secondary is sitting lower in the water, if you think of it that way. So that's what helps keep the stability of a kayak like this in the water, feeling a little bit more platformed. And it does serve its purpose very well. It's insane how great this thing handles on the water, especially if you're a bigger guy. And when you get into something like this one right here, this gets to be a little bit more pronounced in the keel side of it. So you're riding more on the water line with this keel. So essentially what they're trying to do in this geometry, and if you look at a lot of the reviews on Crescents, and you can talk to some other people who have also had experience with these kayaks, especially from Crescent, they also speak on behalf of their hull design on this thing and why it works so well. And they're not joking. It is a fantastic kayak. I do love them. I can't say anything bad about this geometry for what this hull is. Anyways, with this hull design like this, you get this pronounced primary section of the kayak right here. And then your secondaries out here, they're a lot lower in the water. Now that, when you flip that over, that's actually what's causing this kayak to want to rock left and right. And when you get into that secondary right here, there's plenty of body across the edge of this kayak right here, which holds you up. So you can actually kind of sit there and lean, especially if you're trying to take care of a fish or whatever it is, or if you're in the rapids and you're trying to carve around, you know, rapids and things like that, or fighting current. You have the ability to maneuver and turn much easier in something like this than what you do here. Because if you think about it, there's more surface area on this kayak in the water than what there is here. So while you're gliding through the water and your kayak only sits, you know, so many inches deep in there, you're pretty much riding the entire primary on here, and you're just kind of gliding some water across the secondary in here, which opens up the whole front of this right here. And that keeps the nose of this up out of the water more than what you have right here. So you're gonna wind up, you know, pushing more water with something like this, and you're gonna be a little bit more forgiving on the water with something like this. Now they both handle really well going downriver. I've used them both going downriver, but when it comes to paddling up a river, this is the one that's gonna shine a lot better just because of the geometry of the hull. There's less surface area right here, so you get less resistance in the water and you glide faster. It's easier to paddle, and it's a lot easier to turn and maneuver than what something like this is. And having that keel on there with this rudder on here works great. I mean, because you kind of need that. There's not a whole lot happening here because as this draws out, this is all keeping you tracking. I mean, I've got probably 5 inches of something here to track, and I've got, you know, less than that, but you're dragging a little bit with your wheel, which isn't very much. The wheel's great, but it is great for just kind of maneuvering around. But when you get into something like this, it's a little lighter. I can throw this around easier than what I can this. One of the other things that you're going to see in these kayaks too is the shape of the nose. The nose on this kayak right here is a bit more sharper, and this one right here is a bit more rounded. And this is going to work great for slicing into water and stuff than what this one here will. But essentially, when you're riding in the water, you don't really notice it too much. They're both fantastic kayaks. I can't say enough about them. Now, if any of you guys out there are used to using a canoe and you know how you feel in a canoe, this is a bit more on the canoe side than what this is. And let's go take a look at a canoe and kind of show you exactly what's happening with the canoe so you can kind of see that too, especially if you haven't been in a canoe and you want to see the comparison a little bit, knowing that so many people are comfortable in canoes, which one might be the one for you potentially too. All right, here's a perfect example of a canoe. Wait, something's wrong with that one. Let's look at a different one. All right, so now we're talking about a perfect example of why a canoe rides so well in the water. Most aluminum canoes have a very flat bottom on there, and that is one of the reasons why these things are so stable. The more you weight these things down and get them into the water, the deeper it sets in, and you have even more stability just because your center of gravity is lower. You've gotten the belly of this down below the water, your butt sits a lot closer to the water, and you wind up with an insane amount of stability with something like this. Moreover, even than on a typical kayaks. But when there's two people in one of these, they actually balance out pretty nice with a little bit of weight. They're fantastic. And you can see that there's a small keel on here, and it doesn't take a whole lot to help keep these, canoes, tracking well. But what you do find is having a keel on these things, not only does it help track, but it also helps keep the boat from wanting to roll a little bit. Water has pressure on it, and the pressure kind of pushes back towards that keel line, and that helps a little bit your stability. So when you get into kayaks, as long as it's got a pronounced primary keel in there, it will track well, and you do get a sense of balance in there as long as you have some secondary in there. In those Crescents, it's a balance. It works really well. Something like this, you can see it's really flat, and that's going to give you a lot more stability. I can stand in this canoe and sight fish. It's not a problem. I've done it many times when I want to go out by myself, just kind of putting around on a lake like when I was in the Boundary Waters, and it's fun. You get your feet wide planted on here, and you have really good stability with this. But this one right here runs pretty flat, so it's pretty much all, I guess you would say, a primary. There isn't much of a secondary in this. If you wanted to call something primary, it's probably going to be that keel, and that's not a lot, but it serves its purpose for a canoe. There is nothing on these surfaces right here that actually helps guide you when you're trying to, keep yourself going straight in the water. You will still find that the canoes want a dog leg, and if one person's paddling harder than the other, you'll find yourself pulling off to the left, pulling off to the right. And so having a good paddler in the rear who can actually control a little bit of that and use this paddle as a rudder will help keep this kayak or this canoe rolling through the water really nicely. So this gives you an idea what you're seeing on a flat system in some of these kayaks like that actually give you more stability. So let's go back and take a look at those kayaks. All right, so one of the things I want to take a look at with these kayaks here, both when we look at them, let's look at the Feelfree lure. And you'll notice that as you go down this thing from the bow to the stern, it looks relatively flat. I'm gonna try to get this best in the water line if you could see it that way, but it is fairly flat. And that's one of the things that helps the stability in this, but it also creates some slowness. Now let's go take a look at the Crescent. All right, now we're looking at the Crescent, and you can see as you come down here from the bow and you work your way across the surfaces to the stern, you can see that there's a little bit of an arch in there. That arch that you're seeing in there is actually what's also going to help you maneuver in the water, and it gives you a little bit of more speed because you're relying a little bit more on the center of this canoe to actually be in the water, and your bow is a little bit up out of the water. Your stern is a little bit up out of the water, and on top of that, you look down this kayak and you can see that's fairly predominant right there, how you have that secondary, which is sitting off to the side, and it sits low. So you're riding really well on the center primary. So you have that sense of moving water with less resistance on a kayak like this. But then you come over into something like this, and you can definitely see that secondary is very bulbous. Very bulbous. And the primary is still a good primary, but it sits lower than the secondary. And that's one of the things that causes this kayak to sit a lot slower in the water. All right, so I'm about ready to wrap it up, and I want to give you my final thoughts on this. And I hope you did enjoy this. And if you did, do me a favor and hit that like, hit that share, and subscribe. Anyways, the final thoughts I want to say on these kayaks here before I wrap it all up is you have to also consider selling points. Now, speed and stability are key factors for what I want. I fish rivers. I don't have a lot of lakes around me. It's primarily rivers. I do have lakes, but they're about a 45-minute drive and to get into some really good water. But I have rivers that are probably maybe 50 feet wide, rivers that run on an average between 3 to 15 feet deep. And there's phenomenal fishing in there, and that's primarily where I like to fish. So for me, it suits me best to be in something like this. If I wanted to be in lakes, I probably would be fine with both, but I would probably lean towards something like this. Now you can get into a different Crescent that has similar geometry hull, and that'll get you into something like the Shoaly or something like that. Now they're designed fantastic for the rivers and stuff like that, but from what I've read on reviews, these actually do the LiteTackles run a little faster. And I'm not sure exactly why. I do believe there's a little bit difference in the geometry of the hull, but it's got the same build principle, so you still get a lot of the same key benefits out of it. Now, one of the key features for me when I decided that I wanted to buy a kayak, And I hadn't even seen one of these on the market at the time yet. But I looked at a lot of reviews. I read a lot of reviews. I mean, I was in depth. I mean, just like OCD, I have to buy the right one. And I can't say it enough. This is a phenomenal kayak here, and it's got great reviews. You can go online and check for yourself for what people are saying. They do say they can paddle a little bit like a barge, you know, but that's to be expected. You have a large secondary in there, but if speed isn't the factor, then it works great for you. But what I loved about this is the fact that when I'm out in the water all day long, I want to be able to get up and stretch my legs a little bit. I can stand in this thing, but if I want to sit a little bit more comfortable like I can in a canoe, I can pick this one up. That's a lot of height right there. Now when I'm in this thing fishing, I don't know if you're going to find a kayak that's more comfortable than this. And I can't say enough. This is probably one of the most comfortable chairs I've ever sat in when it comes to fishing in something that's mobile like this. The other key factor when I bought this was I like the center console in this thing. The center console comes out, and I added my own depth finder in there. Also, I love the locking hatch on this. The locking hatch on this right here is awesome. It's got a lot of rod storage in there. I can fit a couple rods in this. I can slide them all the way down, and I've got 7-foot rods that easily fit into this. Now, if you get a really stiff rod, like maybe something for, you know, catfishing or something, you might have a little bit of a complication trying to get that thing in there because you do have to arch it a little bit. So if you have something that's got a little bit of a moderate action, they fit in there really well, especially fly rods. But most fly rods also can break down, so it's not that big of a deal. But I've packed a lot of gear in here for camping, and it works awesome. And it's got a rubber seal on there to seal all the moisture and stuff out of there. And it's got rod tip protectors on there, so when I'm kayaking, I can actually run my rods through here up in the point, you know, lock them in place with these straps right here, and that'll park everything I need. I got clasps on here that I can ratchet over my reel on here, so you don't have to worry about my rod coming out. And this came with an add-on that I could put the rudder on here, and I thought that was perfect because the reviews I saw on this were some of them that tracking isn't the greatest when you don't have a rudder on here. So I added the rudder. But the key thing that is awesome about a kayak like this, I can take that center console out, and now I can convert this over to a pedal drive. Now let's get over into the Crescent. And I love this because I do sit low in the water in this one right here. It's a great kayak. But if you want to sit higher, unfortunately, this is what you have to have. Now this is the riser that comes with this. And you just put it in place. It'll drop right in. And now you're sitting up a lot higher. And you still have plenty of good height. Now there again, there's your secondary, what I'm talking about right there. So, but you're not sitting quite as high, but you're still relatively comfortable. Now the unfortunate situation is where do you put this? There's nowhere to put this at all. So for me, you can see it's kind of dusty. I don't even use it. It's not even worth it. I just go with this. And what you haven't seen so far is I've got a new kayak, and it's the new version of this one, and I love it. I haven't had it on the water yet, so I'm gonna do a little bit of a review on that one. And that one's gonna give me some adjustability with the seat that's in there. Now, if you want a higher seat, and this one sits low because this is a low seat, Crescent does make a kayak seat for this that sits higher. And you'll find it's the same geometry, it's just that the legs are longer. So that way, when you're sitting in here, now the kayak seat's gonna sit a little bit higher, and that might be good for somebody who's got a bad back. When you sit lower in the kayak like this, for any kayak for that matter, and you get your butt closer to the water column, you're gonna have a really good sense of stability. You have a lot more control in the kayak, and you can paddle fast, paddle hard, and you can get to where you wanna go. So not only were one of the factors I liked about this kayak was the fact that I can sit low in this, but I also have a front hatch in this one. This hatch completely comes out. It's a larger front opening in this one than what the lure has in it, and I can also still run rods all the way down in this one. It's awesome. I can get bigger bags in this one than what I can in this one. If I have anything larger, you know, when you get into things like your sleeping bag, your tent, whatever it might be, you know, you have more room to get those in there. Well, thanks a lot for tuning in with me and hanging in this long. I know it was a lot to go over, and I have a lot of information kind of throw out there from my experiences. Now, I'm still consider myself a novice. I mean, these are the only 2 kayaks I've ever owned, but from my experience, I've done a lot of reviews, and from what I'm experienced on one kayak from the other, I'm trying to give you my best, impression of what I've seen from something that runs in the water like this versus something like that. Well, I hope that answered all your questions that you might have had about kayaks and stability, and especially when it kind of comes to compromising your stability with speed. There's a lot to kind of take into consideration, and you have to kind of decide what it is that you want for a kayak and weigh out those options. Are you going to be in a river? Are you going to be in a lake more? Are you going to be in both? If that's the case, you might want to balance between the 2 of them. Look at something like this. If you want something that's going to be just for cruising and speed, definitely go with something more narrower. The cool part about chairs like this, when you get to camp, you don't even have to pack a chair. You're good to go. I can do the same thing with that one. So that's the great part about buying internal frame chairs. So hopefully that's a selling point when you're taking a look at what kayak it is you're looking for. Because some of them actually just have a seat built right into them with the foam pad. All right, thanks a lot for staying with me this long. I know it was a lot to kind of go over, but hopefully it helped you a lot. Anyways, until next time, keep your hook set and rod bent. See ya.